"My mama died today. Can I spend a night with you?" That's what the Apache girl said when she collapsed at the mountain man's door during the storm. He'd buried his own family 3 years back and sworn off the world. But this wasn't just any girl seeking shelter. Inside her mother's medicine pouch lay something that would change everything. Papers the army would kill for, and secrets that connected her to his past in ways neither could imagine. The colonel's patrol thunders closer, hunting what they call a runaway thief. But what she carries isn't stolen. When badges meet blood and the past collides with justice, can a broken man's heart make room for the daughter fate delivered to his door? Your reactions reaffirm something simple yet powerful, that stories still shape us, even in silence. If you believe in the soft endurance of love, truth, and doing what's right, then you're exactly why these stories exist. Dawn broke cold and gray over the Colorado Territory mountains that September morning in 1887. Talina Santos knelt beside the freshly turned earth beneath a towering pine tree, its trunk bearing the ancient scar of lightning's fury. Her hands trembled as she smoothed the last handful of soil over her mother's grave. The ceremonial dress she had wrapped around Maria Singingbird's body was her mother's most precious possession, intricate beadwork catching what little light filtered through the heavy clouds above. Into the grave, Talina had placed the sacred items according to Apache tradition: her mother's favorite clay bowl, dried herbs for the journey ahead, and the small wooden comb that had belonged to her grandmother. "Journey well, Mother," she whispered in Apache, her voice rough from crying through the night. The wind stirred the pine needles overhead, carrying the scent of approaching rain. Rising slowly, Talina brushed the dirt from her worn skirt and looked around the empty clearing where their small band had camped. During the night, the other Apache families had melted away into the darkness like shadows. They had warned her mother for weeks that army patrols were moving closer, but Maria Singingbird had been too weak to travel. Now Talina stood alone. Her mother's final words echoed in her mind. "Seek the white man who showed kindness during the bitter winter, the one they call McCready." It wasn't much to go on, but it was all she had. Talina touched the medicine pouch hanging at her waist, her mother's last gift to her. Inside were the precious herbs and small tools that Maria Singingbird had used to heal both Apache and settler alike. The leather was smooth from years of use, worn soft by her mother's hands. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Talina began walking through the pine forest. She had never ventured this far north before, and the terrain was unfamiliar. The trees here grew closer together, their branches creating deep shadows that made every direction look the same. Her feet, clad in soft moccasins, moved silently over the carpet of pine needles. The first drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the leaves overhead. Talina pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, but it did little to keep out the growing chill. The storm moved in quickly, as mountain storms often did. Soon the rain was coming down in sheets, turning the ground treacherous beneath her feet. Hours passed as she pushed forward, her legs growing heavier with each step. The grief she had held at bay since her mother's last breath threatened to overwhelm her. Her chest felt tight, making it hard to breathe in the thin mountain air. Lightning split the sky, and in that brief, brilliant moment, Talina saw it. A cabin set back among the trees, maybe a quarter-mile ahead. A thin trail of smoke rose from its stone chimney, barely visible through the curtain of rain. Her strength finally failed her. Just steps from the cabin's door. Talina's knees buckled, and she fell forward onto the rough wooden porch. The medicine pouch pressed against her side as she gathered her last reserves of energy to reach up and knock. For long moments, there was only the sound of rain and thunder. Then heavy footsteps approached from inside. The door creaked open, revealing a tall man with a graying beard and hard eyes that had seen too much sorrow. His rough hands gripped the doorframe as he stared down at her in surprise. Samuel McCready had not expected visitors, especially not on a night like this. He certainly hadn't expected to find a young Apache woman collapsed on his doorstep, her black hair plastered to her face by the rain, her dark eyes filled with a pain he recognized all too well. Talina looked up at him through the rain streaming down her face, mixing with the tears she could no longer hold back. "Please," she said in careful English, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mother spoke of your kindness. I have nowhere else to go." Thunder crashed overhead, shaking the very ground beneath them. Macready's hands tightened on the doorframe as he struggled with memories of another stormy night, of another life he couldn't save. The girl before him shivered, clutching something at her waist, a medicine pouch he remembered seeing before, during that desperate winter when he had shared his supplies with a group of Apache families. For a moment longer he hesitated, the weight of his past pressing down on him like the storm clouds above. Then, with a gruff motion, he stepped back from the doorway. "Best come in before you catch your death," he said, his voice rough from disuse. Inside the cabin, a single oil lamp cast wavering shadows across rough-hewn walls. Samuel Macready moved with careful precision as he cleaned the scratches on Talina's hands and arms, earned from her desperate journey through the forest. His own hands, calloused from years of working wood, felt clumsy with the gentle task. "Madre, my mother," Talina began, her English halting but clear. "The fever took her this morning." She switched briefly to Spanish, then back again. "I buried her as our people do, under the lightning tree." Samuel kept his eyes on his work, uncomfortable with the raw grief in her voice. 3 years of speaking to no one but himself had left him ill-equipped for such intimacy. The lamp's flame flickered as another gust of wind rattled the cabin's windows. "Wait here," he said gruffly, rising to his feet. From the wooden chest at the foot of his bed, he pulled out a dress. Simple brown cotton, carefully folded. It had been Catherine's, saved these past 3 years like everything else that had belonged to his wife. "You can change behind the screen. Can't have you catching fever yourself." Talina accepted the dress with both hands, a gesture of respect that made Samuel look away. He busied himself adding wood to the fire while she changed, but couldn't help noticing how she carried herself with quiet dignity despite her exhaustion and loss. The dress, when she emerged, hung loose on her smaller frame, but was clean and dry. "Gracias," she said softly, settling near the fire's warmth. "We were alone, Mother and I, for many weeks while the fever grew worse. Yesterday, the others saw army scouts in the valley. They left in the night." Her voice remained steady, but her hands twisted in the borrowed dress's fabric. "They will send us far away, to the reservation where my mother's cousins starved last winter." Samuel stirred the beans simmering in the pot over the fire, adding a pinch of salt. The cornbread was already done, its golden crust gleaming in the firelight. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, the familiar routine helping him maintain his distance from the girl's plight. They ate in silence broken only by the storm's fury outside. Thunder shook the cabin's walls, and rain drummed steadily on the roof. Talina ate slowly, mechanically, as if remembering her body's needs only when the food was before her. Samuel recognized the look. He'd seen it in his own mirror in those first dark months after Catherine's death. When the meal was done, Samuel arranged a bedroll near the hearth, using spare blankets he kept for trading. "You'll sleep here," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Rules are simple. No noise, no touching my things. Come morning, you'll need to move on." Talina nodded, accepting his terms without argument. She settled onto the bedroll, wrapping one of the blankets around her shoulders. In the dying firelight, silent tears tracked down her cheeks, though she made no sound. Samuel took his usual place by the window, where he'd spent countless nights watching storms roll across the mountains. But tonight, instead of finding comfort in solitude, he found his attention drawn to the quiet figure by his hearth. Her grief was too familiar, too raw. It stirred memories he'd worked hard to bury. The girl's quiet dignity in the face of loss reminded him painfully of Catherine. His wife had faced her own end with similar grace, extracting a promise from him to keep his heart open to those in need. It was a promise he'd failed to keep, retreating instead to this lonely cabin and his self-imposed exile from human connection. Now, Watching Talina's tears glisten in the lamplight, Samuel felt something shift in his carefully maintained walls of isolation. The protective instincts he'd thought long dead stirred reluctantly to life. He recognized in her the same deep wounds he carried, the loss of family, of home, of certainty in the world. The storm continued its assault on the mountain, but inside the cabin, something was changing. Samuel remained by his window, wrestling with emotions he'd thought safely buried. While behind him, Talina finally succumbed to exhaustion. Her breathing evened out into the rhythm of sleep, but the tears on her cheeks had yet to dry. The grey light of dawn crept through the cabin's windows, bringing with it a fine mountain mist that clung to the pines outside. Samuel stood at his cast-iron stove, the familiar rhythm of making breakfast helping him settle his thoughts after a restless night. The sizzle of flapjacks on the griddle filled the small space with a homey warmth. Talina sat at the rough-hewn table, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee. She had folded Catherine's borrowed dress neatly beneath her as she sat, a gesture of respect that made Samuel's throat tighten unexpectedly. "Your kindness reminds me," Talina said softly, her English careful but clear. "My mother's last words. She spoke of a white man who helped our people during the bitter winter." She reached into the pocket of her dress and withdrew a small leather pouch, decorated with intricate beadwork and worn smooth by years of handling. Her medicine pouch. She wanted me to keep it safe. Samuel set a plate of steaming flapjacks before her, then froze as Talina carefully opened the pouch. Among the sacred items inside lay a wooden cross, its surface darkened with age, but still bearing the distinctive carved pattern he knew by heart. His hands trembled as he picked it up. "I made this," he whispered, 8 winters ago." The memories flooded back, sharp and clear as the mountain air. The winter of 1879 had brought the worst blizzard in living memory. Samuel and Catherine had just finished their new ranch house when the storm hit. They'd taken in several Apache families who'd been caught in the open, including a woman named Maria Singing Bird and her sick little boy. "Your mother," Samuel said, his voice rough with remembrance. "She stayed in our front room, tending her son through the fever." He turned the cross over in his hands, tracing the familiar pattern. "Catherine was pregnant then. She and your mother spoke for hours while the storm raged outside. Your brother—" "Little Wolf," Talina supplied softly. "I remember him, though I was very young." Samuel nodded. "He was so weak. I carved this cross for him, hoping it might bring him comfort. Worked on it by lamplight while the wind howled outside." He cleared his throat. "We shared what food we had, kept everyone warm as best we could. But the fever was too strong." "He died in the night," Talina said. "Mother told me the story many times, how you and your wife showed such kindness, asking nothing in return. How you helped her bury him properly, despite the frozen ground." Her dark eyes met Samuel's. "The story spread among our people, the white man and woman who opened their door when others turned away." Samuel set the cross down carefully, his heart aching with memories of Catherine. She had been 7 months pregnant, but still insisted on caring for their guests herself. Her gentle heart had touched everyone she met. "Mother knew exactly where she was leading me," Talina continued quietly. "Her last gift was guiding me to the one white man our people trust. She said you would remember the cross." The revelation struck Samuel like a physical blow. Maria Singing Bird's final act of motherhood had been to ensure her daughter's safety, trusting in a connection forged through kindness 8 years before. He looked at Talina with new eyes, seeing not just a desperate stranger but a sacred trust. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of understanding. Outside, the mist was beginning to lift, revealing a clear morning sky. Samuel's carefully constructed isolation crumbled in the face of this providence. "You'll stay," he said finally, his gruff voice softening. "At least until we figure out what's best to do next. I made a promise once to help those in need." He didn't add that the promise had been to Catherine on the day they buried Maria's son. I reckon your mother remembered that promise better than I did. Talina's eyes filled with tears, but she held herself with dignity. Thank you, she said simply, touching the carved cross with gentle fingers before returning it to the medicine pouch. Samuel turned back to the stove, hiding his own emotion as he poured fresh coffee. The morning light streamed through the windows now, warming the cabin's interior. For the first time in 3 years, the space felt like something more than just shelter. It felt like the beginning of healing. The third morning dawned clear and cool in the mountain valley. Samuel led Talina to his small garden plot behind the cabin, where late summer vegetables still grew in neat rows. The morning dew sparkled on squash leaves and bean vines as Samuel demonstrated how to check the plants for signs of frost damage. Garden needs tending daily, he explained, showing her how to prop up a leaning tomato plant, just like people do. Talina knelt beside him, her hands gentle as she copied his movements. In Apache, we call the garden Mother Earth's gifts, she said softly. Nadakani. She pronounced it carefully, watching Samuel's face as he tried to repeat the word. Nadakani. He stumbled, making her smile for the first time since her arrival. Close enough, she said, then pointed to different plants, teaching him their Apache names. Samuel found himself drawn into the lesson, his gruff exterior softening as they worked side by side. As the morning progressed, they moved to his workshop, where Samuel taught her to repair tools. Talina's quick mind and steady hands impressed him. She explained how she had served as her mother's interpreter for 2 years, bridging 3 languages while also being her caregiver. Mother was too weak to travel, Talina said, carefully sanding a broken axe handle. But her mind stayed sharp. She taught me everything she could, Apache wisdom, Spanish prayers, English words, said knowledge was the strongest medicine. Samuel nodded, watching her work. 18's mighty young to carry such burdens. Age matters less than what needs doing, Talina replied, her voice carrying a wisdom that made Samuel's heart ache. Mother taught me to dream of better things, even in hard times. She paused in her work, dark eyes distant. I have a dream, Mr. Macready, not for riches or easy living, but for a place where our peoples could live together in peace. Her voice grew stronger as she described her vision. Apache children playing with Mexican and Anglo friends, families sharing harvest feasts, different prayers rising to the same sky. Samuel's hands stilled on his work as he listened. The hope in her voice stirred something long dormant in his heart, challenging the bitter comfort of his isolation. Later, he taught her to split kindling while she showed him how to weave grass into small, sturdy baskets. The rhythmic work created a space for sharing that felt natural, unforced. Mother said walls between peoples are built of fear, Talina said, guiding his clumsy fingers through the weaving pattern. But every shared skill makes those walls lower. As evening approached, they sat on the cabin's porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. The peaceful moment opened something in Samuel's heart, letting words he had held for 3 years finally spill out. My Catherine, he began roughly. She was carrying our first child when the fever took her. His hands clenched on his knees. 3 years ago this past spring. Nothing I tried helped either of them. Lost them both in one terrible night. Talina's hands stilled on her weaving, her eyes full of understanding. Couldn't bear to stay at the ranch after. Samuel continued. Too many memories, too much guilt for not saving them. Built this cabin, told myself I was done with people. He drew a shaky breath. Reckon I was really just done with hurting. Grief is a heavy load, Talina said softly. My people say it is like carrying water in a cracked vessel. Alone, we spill every drop. Together, we help each other drink. Samuel felt tears burn his eyes for the first time in years. Your mother knew that, I expect? Sending you here, Maybe she was helping us both. Talina reached out slowly, laying her small hand over his weathered one. The gesture bridged more than physical distance. It connected their shared losses, their shared healing. They sat in companionable silence as the stars emerged. Samuel felt the iron bands around his heart loosening, making room for something new. Not replacement for what was lost, but a different kind of family bond, born of shared grief and growing trust. The evening breeze carried the scent of pine and sage, mingling with the smoke from the cabin's chimney. In that peaceful moment, Samuel realized Talina's dream of different peoples living together wasn't just a young girl's fantasy. It was a vision of healing that his Catherine would have cherished. On the fourth morning, Samuel and Talina worked side by side in the garden, harvesting the last of the summer vegetables. The peaceful mountain air carried the scent of ripening tomatoes and fresh-turned earth. Samuel showed Talina how to check the squash for readiness when a sound made them both freeze, hoofbeats approaching, accompanied by the distinctive jingle of military tack. "Inside," Samuel said sharply, but before they could move, a cloud of dust appeared on the trail. 6 riders emerged, their blue uniforms stark against the mountain greenery. At their head rode a stern-faced officer, his colonel's insignia glinting in the morning sun. Samuel stepped forward, positioning himself between Talina and the approaching patrol. The riders reined in their mounts, dust settling around their horses' hooves as the colonel dismounted with practiced grace. "I am Colonel James Hartwell," the officer announced, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Though in his late 40s, he stood ramrod straight, every inch the career soldier. "I have orders concerning the Apache girl." Samuel's jaw tightened. "This is private property, Colonel." Hartwell pulled a folded paper from his coat. "These orders authorize me to retrieve a runaway Apache who stole valuable items from the reservation before fleeing." His gray eyes fixed on Talina. "She must be returned immediately." "That's a lie," Talina said, her voice quiet but firm. Though fear showed in her dark eyes, she held herself with dignity. "I have never lived on any reservation. My people moved freely between Mexican settlements and our traditional camps." The colonel's expression hardened. "The law requires all Apache to report to designated agencies. No exceptions." He gestured to his men. "These orders are quite clear." Samuel planted his feet more firmly. "Show me these supposedly stolen items." "The medicine pouch she carries," Hartwell said. "It contains artifacts belonging to the reservation." "This was my mother's," Talina protested, one hand clutching the pouch at her waist. "Given to her by her own mother. No one else has any claim to it." Hartwell's patience visibly thinned. "Step aside, Mr. McCready. Don't force me to arrest you for harboring a fugitive." The soldiers shifted in their saddles, hands moving closer to their weapons. Samuel felt the tension coiling tighter with each passing moment. "You've got no right," he growled. "This girl's done nothing wrong." "The law gives me every right," Hartwell countered. "Now stand down, or—" "Wait!" Talina's voice cut through the confrontation. She moved forward, though staying close to Samuel's protective presence. "There's something you need to know, Colonel." Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "My mother wasn't just any Apache woman. Her name was Maria Santos, and she was legally married to Don Carlos Santos 20 years ago." The revelation landed like a thunderbolt. Hartwell's stern expression faltered for the first time. "Maria Santos?" he repeated. "The Mexican landowner's wife?" "Yes," Talina said. "I am their daughter, Talina Santos Macready. I have my mother's marriage papers in her medicine pouch, along with letters from my uncle, Father Miguel Santos." She lifted her chin. "That makes me a legal heir to the Santos lands, not a reservation ward." Samuel watched understanding dawn in Hartwell's eyes. The colonel's military certainty wavered as he realized the situation was far more complex than his orders suggested. "If what you say is true," Hartwell said slowly, "this changes matters considerably." He studied Talina with new interest. The Santos land grant has been in dispute since Don Carlos's death. If you are indeed his legitimate heir—" "I am," Talina stated firmly, "and I have the papers to prove it." The tension in the yard shifted, transforming from physical threat to legal complexity. Samuel kept his protective stance, but he could see the colonel reassessing his approach. "This will require verification," Hartwell said finally. "Documentation must be examined, witnesses consulted." He straightened his uniform jacket. "In the meantime, I suggest you remain here where you can be easily located." "She's not going anywhere," Samuel declared, making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Hartwell nodded curtly. "I will return when I have consulted with territorial authorities about this development." He mounted his horse, gathering the reins. "But make no mistake, this matter is far from settled." The patrol wheeled their horses around, hooves kicking up fresh dust as they departed. Samuel and Talina watched until the riders disappeared down the trail, the morning silence returning to the mountain clearing. Colonel Hartwell's face tightened as he dismounted again, dust settling around his polished boots. "Inheritance claims are easily made, girl. Proving them is another matter entirely." But something in his tone rang false, like a cracked bell. His practiced authority seemed to waver, his eyes shifting away when Talina met his gaze. "I have proof," Talina said. She reached into her mother's medicine pouch, handling it with reverence. From inside, she drew out a carefully wrapped bundle of papers, protected by oiled leather from the elements. Samuel watched as she unfolded the documents with careful fingers. The yellowed papers bore official seals and formal writing, some in Spanish, others in English. Though the language was beyond his understanding, the official markings and signatures spoke of legitimacy. "A marriage certificate," Talina explained, holding out the first document. "From the church in San Luis, and here." She produced another paper. "The land deed copies my mother kept safe all these years." The colonel's men shifted restlessly in their saddles, the horses pawing at the ground as Hartwell took the papers. His face darkened as he studied them, and Samuel noticed a bead of sweat tracking down the officer's temple despite the cool mountain morning. "Where did you get these forgeries?" Hartwell demanded, but his voice lacked conviction. Talina stood straighter, her chin lifting. "My mother told me everything before she died. She married Don Carlos Santos in 1867. He was a wealthy rancher, respected in the territory." Her voice grew softer, touched with sadness. "But in 1868, Apache raids threatened their ranch. My mother was caught between two worlds, her Apache people and her Mexican husband. When I was just a newborn, she fled with me, trying to protect me from the violence on both sides." Samuel watched Hartwell's reaction carefully. The colonel's military bearing seemed to crack slightly as Talina continued her story. "Don Carlos died believing we had been killed," she said. "But his will was clear. All his property would pass to any children of Maria Santos, regardless of tribal affiliation. Those are his exact words, Colonel. My mother made sure I knew them by heart." Hartwell's fingers tightened on the papers, crinkling their edges. Samuel could almost see the calculations running behind the officer's eyes. 640 acres of prime valley land, with water rights that would be invaluable to any settlement or military installation. "These will need to be verified," Hartwell said finally, his voice strained. "The territorial authorities will have to examine every detail. Until then—" He gestured to his men. "The girl must remain in protective custody." "No." Samuel's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "She stays here." "This is a military matter now, Macready," Hartwell snapped. "These documents, if authentic, affect plans already in motion. The girl must be properly supervised while we investigate." "Supervised?" Samuel stepped closer to Talina. "You mean imprisoned until you can find a way around her claim?" Two of Hartwell's men dismounted, hands resting on their holsters. The colonel's face flushed with anger. "You're interfering with official business, Macready. Stand aside." "Not without proper legal representation," Samuel growled. The girl has rights. If these documents are real, and you seem mighty concerned that they might be, then she's entitled to legal protection. Talina pulled out one final paper from the pouch. There's more, Colonel. Letters from my uncle, Father Miguel Santos. He can verify everything I've said. This seemed to give Hartwell pause. A Catholic priest's testimony would carry weight, especially one connected to a prominent Mexican family. The colonel's jaw worked as he considered his options. Finally, he handed the documents back to Talina with obvious reluctance. I will investigate these claims through proper channels, he said stiffly. But make no mistake, this land is vital to territorial security. The army has plans that won't be easily set aside. The law is the law, Samuel said quietly. Even for the army. Hartwell's eyes narrowed at this challenge, but he merely nodded curtly. We'll return soon. Have these documents ready for official examination. He turned to his men. Mount up. As the patrol rode away, Samuel placed a protective hand on Talina's shoulder. She was trembling slightly, though her face remained composed. He knows something, she whispered. Did you see his face when he read the papers? Samuel nodded grimly. Aye, and whatever it is, he's not happy about it. He squeezed her shoulder gently. But don't worry. We'll fight this proper and legal-like. Your mother kept those papers safe all these years for a reason. Talina carefully rewrapped the precious documents and returned them to the medicine pouch. What do we do now? Now, Samuel said, watching the dust settle on the trail. We find ourselves a lawyer who's not afraid to stand up to the United States Army. Samuel stirred the campfire's embers as dawn broke over the mountain peaks. We're riding to San Luis Mission today, he announced, his voice firm but gentle. Your uncle might have the proof we need. Talina looked up from where she sat wrapped in a borrowed blanket. But Colonel Hartwell. Already agreed, Samuel cut in, though he's sending 2 soldiers to keep an eye on us. He gestured toward the pair of army men setting up camp just within sight of the cabin. The morning sun painted the Colorado Territory in shades of gold as they prepared for the journey. Samuel helped Talina mount one of his spare horses, noting how naturally she took to the saddle despite her exhaustion. The soldiers kept their distance, trailing behind as the small group wound their way through pine-covered slopes and into rocky passes. As they rode, Talina shared more of her story, her voice carrying softly on the mountain air. My mother learned reading and writing at the mission school, she explained, ducking under a low-hanging branch. She kept sending letters to the church all these years, trying to keep some connection to her Mexican life. Samuel guided his horse around a narrow bend. Must have been hard, living between 2 worlds like that. She was always afraid, Talina admitted, her hands tightening on the reins. The hostile Apache bands would have seen her as a traitor for marrying a Mexican, and most Mexicans— She paused, swallowing hard. They wouldn't have accepted an Apache wife, no matter how well she spoke Spanish. The sun climbed higher as they descended into desert valleys, heat shimmering off the dusty ground. Samuel kept a careful eye on Colonel Hartwell, who had insisted on personally leading their escort. Something about the officer's rigid posture and frequent backward glances suggested more than simple military duty. The colonel's mighty interested in these land records, Samuel observed quietly when they stopped to water the horses at a small creek. Talina nodded, keeping her voice low. He knows something about my father's property. I can see it in his face whenever the documents are mentioned. The afternoon stretched on as they crossed the territory, the mission's white adobe walls finally appearing as the sun began its westward descent. The bell tower rose against the darkening sky, its cross catching the last golden rays of daylight. Father Miguel Santos stood in the mission doorway as they approached, his black cassock dusty at the hem, his weathered face creased with gentle lines. He raised a hand in greeting, then froze as Talina dismounted and stepped forward. I am Talina Santos, she said clearly in Spanish, then switched to English. Maria Santos was my mother. The transformation in Father Miguel's expression was immediate and profound. Joy bloomed across his features, followed by a flash of recognition so strong it brought tears to his eyes. "Dios mío!" he exclaimed, stepping forward with trembling hands. "I see her in your face, Maria, and my brother Carlos, too." Colonel Hartwell straightened in his saddle. "Your brother?" Father Miguel nodded, never taking his eyes off Talina. "Don Carlos Santos was my younger brother. I have been searching for his child, for you, my niece, ever since Maria's first letter reached me." He touched Talina's cheek gently. "She wrote to me about her life with the Apache people, about her beautiful daughter with both Mexican and Apache blood." The evening bells began to toll, calling the faithful to Vespers. Father Miguel led them inside the cool sanctuary, where he retrieved a heavy leather-bound volume from behind the altar. "Here," he said, laying the book carefully on a wooden lectern. "Our church registry contains all marriage and property records." His fingers traced down the yellowed pages until he found what he sought. The marriage of Carlos Santos and Maria Singingbird, witnessed and blessed by my own hand. And here, he turned several pages, Carlos's will, officially recorded with the church, leaving all properties to any children born of this union. Samuel watched Colonel Hartwell's face as the priest spoke. The officer's expression had grown increasingly troubled with each revelation. "I am prepared to testify to the authenticity of these records before any court," Father Miguel declared firmly. "The church's documentation is unimpeachable, and my personal witness as both priest and brother adds further weight to Talina's claim." Talina stood beside her uncle, her mother's medicine pouch still hanging at her waist, but now her spine was straight with newfound confidence. The last light of day streamed through the mission's windows, illuminating the small group as they faced each other across centuries of conflict and connection, their shared history finally coming full circle in this moment of truth. Morning sunlight streamed through the mission's stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the worn wooden table where Father Miguel carefully arranged a collection of documents. His weathered hands moved with reverence over the yellowed papers, each one a piece of Talina's heritage finally brought to light. "Here is the complete record," Father Miguel said, spreading out the documents. "The marriage certificate of Carlos and Maria Santos, witnessed by myself and 2 other priests." He pointed to the official church seals and signatures at the bottom. "And here, the baptismal record from when Talina was born." Samuel leaned forward, studying the carefully preserved papers. Though he couldn't read the Spanish text, the formal layout and multiple signatures spoke to their importance. Talina stood at his shoulder, her fingers trailing lightly over her father's signature. The mission's bell rang, announcing Sheriff Tom Bradley's arrival. The lawman entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. His lined face and graying temples spoke of decades enforcing frontier justice, while his steady gaze suggested a man who valued truth over politics. "Much obliged for coming so quickly, Sheriff," Samuel said, stepping forward to shake his hand. Bradley nodded, setting his hat on a nearby bench. "Your telegraph mentioned some important documents regarding land claims." His eyes fell on the papers spread across the table. These would be them. Father Miguel guided the sheriff through each document, explaining their significance and authenticity. Bradley's expression grew more serious as he examined Don Carlos's will, which explicitly granted all property rights to any children of Maria Santos, regardless of tribal affiliation. "The legal standing is clear," Bradley said finally, straightening up. "These documents are properly witnessed and sealed. Under territorial law, Señorita Santos has legitimate claim to her father's property." He paused, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "However, the politics of this situation concern me. The army holds considerable sway in land disputes, especially when the claimant has Indian blood." Across the room, Colonel Hartwell paced near the door, his boots clicking against the stone floor. Every few minutes, he would step outside to hand another telegram to the waiting messenger, his agitation growing more visible with each passing hour. While Bradley reviewed the documentation, Father Miguel led Samuel and Talina to a small garden behind the mission. There, surrounded by climbing roses and herb beds, he shared stories about the brother he had loved and lost. Carlos was ahead of his time, Miguel explained, settling onto a stone bench. He believed all people could live together in peace if given the chance. When he fell in love with your mother, Talina, he didn't care what others thought. He saw her spirit, her intelligence, her strength. Talina's eyes glistened. My mother never stopped loving him. She taught me Spanish so I would know both sides of my heritage. Father Miguel smiled gently. Would you allow me to perform a blessing? We could incorporate both Catholic prayers and Apache traditions, a bridge between your two worlds, just as you are. Before Talina could respond, Sheriff Bradley appeared in the garden doorway. I've just filed official recognition of your claim with the Territorial Land Office, he announced. The documentation is now part of the legal record. Samuel released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. That's good news. Bradley held up a cautioning hand. It's a start, but having legal right to land and actually possessing it are two different matters. He glanced toward the front of the mission, where Colonel Hartwell could be heard giving instructions to another messenger. The army has their heart set on that property for their new fort, 640 acres of prime valley land with good water rights. They won't give that up without a fight. But the law is on Talina's side, Samuel protested. The law is clear, Bradley agreed. But frontier justice isn't always about what's clear. It's about who has the power to enforce their will. He adjusted his gun belt with a weary gesture. You've got truth and right on your side, but this fight is far from over. Father Miguel rose from the bench, his expression determined. Then we must prepare for what comes next. The church will support Talina's claim, both legally and morally. Talina stood between these men who had become her protectors, her mother's medicine pouch hanging at her waist, her father's documented legacy spread across the table inside. She lifted her chin, embodying both the Apache warrior's spirit and Mexican landowner's dignity in her bearing. My father believed different peoples could live together in peace, she said quietly. I want to make his dream real, no matter what it takes. The mountain air felt different as Samuel and Talina rode back to his cabin the next morning. Hope rode with them, as tangible as the leather pouch of legal documents secured inside Talina's saddlebag. The autumn sunlight filtered through golden aspen leaves, casting dappled shadows on the trail ahead. Inside the cabin, Talina spread a large piece of smooth birch bark across Samuel's rough-hewn table. Using a charcoal stick, she began sketching her vision of the Santos land. Here, in the valley bottom, she explained, marking the spot. We could build the main settlement. The stream provides year-round water, and the southern slope would shelter buildings from winter winds. Samuel leaned forward, his weathered hands tracing the natural features she'd drawn. Good thinking. That location would give us the best building sites. His eyes crinkled as he studied the sketch. Reckon we could fit 8 or 10 cabins there to start. Talina's face brightened. And here, she pointed to a gentle rise, we could build a small school. Her voice grew soft with emotion. Children would learn English, Spanish, and Apache together. No one would have to forget their language to learn another. Samuel nodded, surprised by how easily he could picture it. We could use local pine for the buildings. I know good techniques for making them weather-tight. He paused, adding gruffly, Your father would have appreciated that dream, mixing cultures instead of forcing folks to choose. They spent hours developing their plans, Samuel contributing his practical knowledge, while Talina shared Apache wisdom about the land. She described how different families could contribute their skills, Apache women teaching traditional basket weaving and medicine, Mexican farmers sharing their irrigation methods, Anglo settlers demonstrating new farming tools. The Apache know how to grow corn and beans in dry soil. Talina explained, sketching small field plots. Working together, we could learn from each other's ways. Samuel pulled out his carpenter's pencil, making careful notes about building materials and water sources. We'll need a communal workshop, he said, warming to the project. A place where folks can share tools and teach their crafts. As afternoon sunlight slanted through the cabin windows, they discussed the legal challenges ahead. Samuel's expression grew serious. You'll need my help dealing with territorial authorities and property laws. White men's courts ain't always fair to people of mixed blood. Talina touched the medicine pouch at her waist. And you'll need my help building trust with the Apache families. They remember your kindness from before, but fear runs deep. Samuel looked at their shared plans, then at the young woman who had stumbled into his life just days ago. Something had changed between them, something deeper than mere friendship or temporary alliance. He saw in her eyes the same strength and wisdom that had drawn him to Catherine years ago. I reckon, he said slowly. It's time for me to leave this cabin. Been hiding up here too long, nursing old hurts instead of building something new. Talina's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. My mother always said grief can trap us like a snare, or it can teach us to help others who are hurting. Samuel's throat tightened. He thought of Catherine, how she would have loved this brave young woman and her dreams of bringing people together. Your mother was wise, he managed, and I reckon you're the daughter I never had. Talina crossed to his side, placing her small hand over his larger one. And you're the father I never knew. She smiled through her tears. Perhaps the Great Spirit knew we needed each other. They worked until dusk, planning and dreaming together. The cabin that had been Samuel's lonely refuge now felt like the birthplace of something remarkable. Not just a settlement, but a family forged by choice rather than blood. As they shared a simple supper of cornbread and beans, both felt the healing power of having someone to protect, someone to believe in, someone to build dreams with. The fire crackled low in the hearth as they finished their planning session. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they had what mattered most: a shared purpose and the unshakable bond between a father and daughter who had found each other against all odds. The autumn morning dawned crisp and clear, but dark clouds gathered on the horizon. Samuel and Talina sat at the cabin table, surrounded by their carefully drawn plans and lists. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both look up sharply. Colonel Hartwell rode into view, leading a patrol twice the size of his previous visit. His military bearing seemed even more rigid, his expression coldly triumphant as he dismounted. Two soldiers flanked him as he strode to the cabin door, spurs jingling with each step. "Mr. McCready, Miss Santos?" Hartwell announced, producing an official-looking document from his coat. "I bring news from the territorial capital." His tone carried a satisfaction that made Samuel's skin crawl. Talina stood straighter, her fingers unconsciously touching the medicine pouch at her waist. Samuel moved closer to her, protective instinct rising at the colonel's smug demeanor. "The territorial legislature has passed a new law," Hartwell continued, unfolding the paper with deliberate slowness. "All land claims held by persons of mixed Indian blood are hereby invalidated unless they can prove full assimilation and Christian marriage to white citizens." The words hit like physical blows. Samuel's fists clenched as Hartwell went on, clearly savoring each devastating detail. Furthermore, the military now has authority to claim any such disputed lands for territorial defense purposes. Hartwell's eyes gleamed. "This law is retroactive. All previous land grants to mixed heritage individuals are null and void." "That ain't right," Samuel exploded, taking a step forward. "She has legal documents." "Church records, her uncle's testimony." "None of which matter anymore," Hartwell replied smoothly. He pulled another paper from his coat. "I have orders here requiring Miss Santos's escort to the Oklahoma Territory Reservation within the week." Talina swayed slightly but remained silent, her face a mask of dignified grief. Samuel moved to stand between her and the colonel, his voice dangerous. "Over my dead body." "That can be arranged, Mr. Macready." Hartwell's hand rested casually on his pistol. "Resistance will only result in your immediate arrest and her deportation. Why make this harder than necessary?" "You had this planned all along," Samuel growled, understanding dawning. "You helped create this law just to steal her land." "The territory requires this land for a new fort," Hartwell stated flatly. "The law provides a legal means to acquire it. My men will camp nearby tonight to prevent any foolish escape attempts. We depart for Oklahoma at dawn." The colonel turned on his heel and strode out, leaving the devastating documents on the table. Through the cabin window, Samuel watched the soldiers setting up camp, their presence a clear threat. As the sun set, Samuel and Talina sat before the hearth fire, their carefully drawn plans scattered uselessly around them. The flames cast flickering shadows on walls that had lately seemed full of promise, but now felt like a prison. Talina hadn't spoken since Hartwell's departure. She stared into the fire, her face set in the stoic mask Samuel recognized from when she'd first arrived. All the joy and hope of recent days had vanished, replaced by the weight of generations of broken promises and stolen dreams. "I am cursed," she whispered finally, her voice hollow. "Everyone I love is taken from me. My father, my mother, my people, and now—" She touched the medicine pouch, hands trembling. "Even my mother's final gift of safety is stripped away." Samuel's heart ached at her words. He had promised to protect her, to help build her dream of a peaceful community. Now he sat helpless, while everything was stolen by the stroke of a pen. His inability to prevent this injustice burned like acid in his chest. "This ain't right," he muttered, more to himself than Talina. "Ain't natural law, ain't God's law, just the greed of men twisting words to steal what ain't theirs." The fire crackled and popped, its warmth unable to touch the cold despair that filled the cabin. Outside, they could hear the soldiers talking and laughing around their campfires, casual guards to their prisoners' grief. All their dreams lay in ruins. The school where children would learn 3 languages, the workshops where skills would be shared, the farms where different cultures would work side by side. The vision of a community built on respect and understanding had been crushed by a law designed to ensure such harmony could never exist. Samuel looked at Talina, seeing not just his adopted daughter, but a symbol of everything good and hopeful they had planned together. The thought of her being torn away and sent to a distant reservation made his blood boil. But Hartwell's threats were not idle. Any resistance would only separate them more quickly and violently. They sat in shared silence as darkness gathered outside, each lost in their own thoughts of what might have been. The injustice of it all hung heavy in the air between them, as tangible as the smoke rising from their dying fire. The crisp morning air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke as Samuel stepped outside, his boots crunching on frost-covered ground. He watched Talina leading the horses to water, her movements mechanical, weighted down by despair. Colonel Hartwell emerged from the soldiers' camp, walking purposefully toward Samuel with an unusual hesitation in his stride. "A word in private, Mr. Macready?" Hartwell's voice lacked its usual commanding tone. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he followed the colonel around the corner of the cabin, out of Talina's earshot. The morning sun cast long shadows through the trees as Hartwell removed his hat, revealing an unexpected vulnerability in his weathered face. "You don't remember me from 8 years ago," Hartwell began. "But I was there, a young lieutenant, watching you and your wife Catherine shelter those Apache families during that brutal winter." Samuel's eyes narrowed as fragments of memory surfaced, a fresh-faced officer standing apart from his patrol, observing their ranch house filled with hungry families. "I've never forgotten what I saw that winter," Hartwell continued, his voice rough with emotion. "You and Catherine showed me what true honor meant, protecting the innocent, not just following orders blindly. The way you shared everything you had, treated them like human beings." He trailed off, staring at the ground. "Why are you telling me this now?" Samuel demanded. "Because I helped create this law." Hartwell's admission came out like a confession. "I thought it would make the land acquisition clean, legal. But seeing Talina, remembering your example, I know it's wrong. I've betrayed everything I learned watching you and Catherine that winter." Samuel's anger warred with surprise at this unexpected revelation. Before he could respond, hoofbeats thundered into the clearing. Father Miguel rode in alongside Sheriff Bradley, both men looking trail-worn and urgent. "We rode through the night," Bradley announced, dismounting stiffly. "Got word about this new legislation. It's worse than we feared." Father Miguel hurried to join them, his usually gentle face set with determination. The law violates both canonical and constitutional principles. Several territorial courts are already challenging its validity. "But that could take months, even years," Bradley added grimly. "Meanwhile, they can enforce it immediately." Hartwell glanced around, then lowered his voice. "There might be a way. The law has a loophole. If Talina marries a white landowner, her children would have full citizenship rights. Her husband could hold the Santos property in trust." Samuel's mind raced with possibilities, but Bradley shook his head. "Finding a suitable match and arranging everything before they force her removal. It seems impossible." "Not necessarily," Father Miguel interjected, years of navigating church bureaucracy evident in his thoughtful tone. "As her uncle and a priest, I have certain authorities under canonical law, and the sheriff here could expedite necessary paperwork." Hartwell straightened, military bearing returning. "I could delay the removal orders for 48 hours, citing administrative requirements, but not longer without raising suspicion." Samuel watched Talina in the distance, still mechanically tending the horses, unaware of the alliance forming to save her future. These men, a conscience-stricken colonel, a determined priest, and a justice-minded sheriff, represented hope he hadn't dared imagine an hour ago. "We need to move carefully," Bradley cautioned. "One wrong step could bring the full force of territorial authority down on all of us." Father Miguel nodded solemnly. "But we must try. The path of justice is rarely easy, but God does not abandon those who stand for what is right." Hartwell squared his shoulders, the weight of his earlier guilt transforming into resolve. "I'll do whatever I can to help make this right. I owe it to the memory of what your kindness taught me, Macready." The morning sun climbed higher as the four men huddled closer, voices low and urgent as they began crafting a plan to navigate the treacherous waters between law and justice, between what was legal and what was right. The very authority that had threatened to destroy Talina's dreams now held the key to saving them, if they could find the courage and wisdom to use it in time. Around Samuel's worn kitchen table, the morning light filtered through dusty windows as Father Miguel spread out legal documents beside Sheriff Bradley's territorial law books. Colonel Hartwell stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, while Talina sat quietly, her fingers tracing the wood grain patterns on the table's surface. "The marriage loophole seems our only path forward," Father Miguel said, his weathered fingers pointing to specific passages. "But it would require someone willing to make a considerable personal sacrifice for the sake of justice." Samuel paced near the window, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floorboards. Hours of internal struggle showed in the deep lines of his face as he watched shadows lengthen across the yard. Finally, he turned to face the group, his decision evident in his squared shoulders. "I'll do it," Samuel said, his voice rough but certain. "I'll marry Talina." Everyone turned to stare at him. Talina's eyes widened with surprise and confusion. "Not as husband and wife," Samuel clarified quickly, moving to stand beside Talina's chair, "but as a legal arrangement that would let me adopt you proper as my daughter. I could hold the Santos land in trust for that community you dream of building." "Samuel, no!" Talina protested, rising from her chair. "You cannot sacrifice your freedom for my sake. You have already done too much." Samuel's expression softened as he looked at the young woman who had brought light back into his dark world. This ain't sacrifice, child. It's fulfillment. These past weeks, you've become the daughter I never had. This would just make official what's already in our hearts." Father Miguel nodded thoughtfully, thumbing through his book of canonical law. The Church recognizes such arrangements when they arise from Christian charity rather than romantic love. There are precedents, particularly in cases involving orphans and guardianship. Sheriff Bradley consulted his own legal documents, spectacles perched on his nose. The territorial law would recognize it too. Marriage to Samuel would grant Talina immediate citizenship rights. Once that's established, he could legally adopt her, and her claim to the Santos land would be restored under his guardianship. Colonel Hartwell stepped forward from the fireplace. "I'll delay the deportation orders and testify to the legitimate nature of this arrangement. I've seen firsthand how you two relate as father and daughter." His voice carried the weight of his earlier confession about witnessing Samuel's past kindness. "The timing must be precise," Bradley cautioned, laying out a timeline on the table. "We'll need to file the marriage certificate, citizenship papers, and adoption documents in exactly the right sequence. I can handle the ecclesiastical requirements," Father Miguel added. "The Church will recognize both the marriage and adoption as acts of Christian charity, providing additional legal protection." Talina looked up at Samuel, tears glistening in her eyes. "You would truly do this for me?" "For us," Samuel corrected gently. "You gave me back my purpose when you showed up at my door that stormy night. Protecting you, helping build that peaceful community you envision, that's not sacrifice. That's redemption." The group spent the afternoon preparing documents, with Father Miguel and Sheriff Bradley ensuring every detail met both church and territorial law requirements. Colonel Hartwell provided crucial information about military protocols they would need to navigate. As evening approached, Samuel and Talina sat together on the cabin's front porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. The simple wooden cross Samuel had carved 8 years ago lay between them on the porch rail, a symbol of how past acts of kindness could ripple forward through time. "I never thought I would have a father again," Talina said softly. "My Apache father died when I was small, and I never knew Don Carlos Santos. And I never thought I'd have a daughter," Samuel replied, his gruff voice gentle. "Catherine and I lost that chance before it began. But maybe that's why God sent you to my door, to make a family built on choice instead of blood." "A family bound by love," Talina agreed, touching the carved cross. "Like this. Simple, strong, connecting different worlds." Inside they could hear Father Miguel preparing the chapel room for tomorrow's ceremony, his quiet prayers mixing with the evening breeze. Sheriff Bradley's pen scratched against paper as he finalized legal documents, while Colonel Hartwell's boots creaked across the floorboards as he reviewed military orders. Their unlikely alliance of priest, sheriff, colonel, and mountain man had found a path through seemingly impossible barriers. Through Samuel's sacrificial love, the very laws meant to destroy Talina's dreams would now protect them instead. Dawn broke over San Luis Mission as golden sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the worn wooden pews. Father Miguel stood at the altar, his weathered hands smoothing his vestments as he prepared for this unique ceremony. The small chapel filled with mission families, their whispered conversations echoing off the adobe walls. Samuel McCready shifted uncomfortably in his freshly pressed shirt, his usually wild beard neatly trimmed for the occasion. Beside him, Talina wore a simple white dress adorned with Apache beadwork and her mother's silver necklace, bridging her heritage with this new chapter of her life. Sheriff Bradley and Colonel Hartwell sat in the front row, official papers carefully arranged between them. The morning light caught the brass buttons of Hartwell's dress uniform as he sat straight-backed, his face solemn with the weight of what they were about to witness. Father Miguel raised his hands for silence, then spoke in clear, measured tones that carried to every corner of the chapel. "We gather today to witness not a traditional marriage, but a sacred covenant of family. Samuel McCready and Talina Santos come before God to forge legal and spiritual bonds as father and daughter." The priest carefully explained the unique nature of the ceremony, emphasizing that their vows would reflect protection, guidance, and familial love. Samuel's gruff voice grew thick with emotion as he promised to guard, guide, and cherish Talina as his own daughter. Talina's clear response, mixing Apache, Spanish, and English words, spoke of respect, honor, and trust in her new father. Immediately following these vows, Father Miguel transitioned to the adoption ceremony. He held up the formal documents Sheriff Bradley had prepared, announcing Talina's new legal name, Talina Santos McCready. The name itself embodied their bridge between cultures, Apache spirit, Mexican heritage, and Scottish family identity united in one person. Sheriff Bradley stepped forward, his formal coat rustling as he presented the land claim papers. Colonel Hartwell rose to add his testimony, his voice carrying military authority as he denounced the discriminatory law he had once supported. "This family's bond proves that justice transcends the barriers we create," he declared, signing his name with a flourish. The celebration that followed blended three cultures into one joyful expression of community. Apache drums kept rhythm with Scottish bagpipes, while Mexican guitars wove melody between them. Women from the mission served traditional foods from all three cultures on long tables in the courtyard. Children played games that mixed Apache skill games with Mexican and Scottish traditions, demonstrating the easy acceptance that comes naturally to the young. As evening approached, Samuel and Talina stood together in the mission garden, now legally father and daughter. The setting sun painted the mountains behind them in shades of purple and gold, a fitting backdrop for this moment of triumph over seemingly impossible odds. Their eyes met with shared understanding. Through sacrifice and love, they had not only secured Talina's future, but found the family they both needed. Spring sunshine warmed the Santos McCready Valley as the morning mist lifted to reveal a bustling community that seemed impossible just 6 months ago. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, Apache hogans beside Mexican adobe homes and Anglo log cabins, while children's laughter echoed across the central plaza. Samuel McCready stood in the doorway of his trading post, watching customers of all backgrounds haggle good-naturedly over goods. He'd made sure his prices were fair for everyone, whether they paid in silver, trade goods, or labor. The shelves held Apache baskets next to Mexican pottery and Anglo tools, a visible symbol of their shared prosperity. Talina moved confidently through the crowd, her English now flowing smoothly as she helped translate between cultures. She'd grown into her role as community leader, respected by all for her wisdom in bridging different ways of life. Her dark eyes sparkled with joy as she watched her dream become reality. At the small church near the creek, Father Miguel rang the morning bell. The building reflected the unique spirit he'd fostered. Crosses decorated with Apache beadwork, while Mexican sacred art hung beside traditional blessing symbols. His services had evolved into something special, weaving together 3 spiritual traditions while respecting each one's essence. In the communal fields, farmers shared knowledge freely. Apache families taught desert irrigation techniques, while Mexican vaqueros demonstrated cattle handling skills. Anglo settlers contributed new crop varieties, creating abundant harvests that benefited everyone. Talina walked to the quiet grove where her mother rested. She placed fresh wildflowers on Maria Singing Bird's grave, whispering thanks in Apache. "You led me to the father I needed, Mother. Your wisdom made all this possible." The sound of approaching hoofbeats announced Colonel Hartwell's arrival. His face shone with excitement as he dismounted. "The territorial court's decision came through," he announced. "That discriminatory land law has been struck down completely. They cited our community as proof that different peoples can live together in peace." He hesitated, then continued softly, "I've resigned my commission. If you're willing, I'd like to settle here, help build what I once tried to prevent." Later that afternoon, Samuel sat with a group of children in the shade of an old pine tree. Apache, Mexican, and Anglo faces looked up at him eagerly as he demonstrated wood-carving techniques. Several were orphans he and Talina had taken in, creating a new kind of family bound by love rather than blood. Nearby, Talina gathered another group for storytelling, her voice carrying clearly as she shared tales of courage and compassion in 3 languages. The children leaned forward, entranced, as she taught them that love could overcome any barrier and that true family grew from the heart. The valley had become more than just a community. It was living proof that different peoples could thrive together when they chose understanding over fear and compassion over prejudice. The next generation would carry this legacy forward, building an even brighter future on the foundation of hope their parents had created. Thank you for watching. If this one reached you, consider subscribing. I'll be back tomorrow with more meaning, more humanity.